important matter has launched today. It's a case of the past catching up with the present. It dates back to the murder of 4 young men, 3 of them teachers, by the apartheid government. But it points a finger at the democratic government, alleging they have for years deliberately dodged meting out justice to the Cradock Four murderers and those who ordered the killings. It's one of some 300 cases that should have moved to the courts for prosecution at the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, the families of the Cradock Four are alleging there is a deliberate political interference by democratic leaders to stop any proceedings in court. And they've gone to court to force the police and the National Prosecuting Authority to make a decision on prosecution. And I'm joined now by Lukhanyo Calata, the son of Fort Calata, one of the Cradock Four, who was abducted, tortured and murdered in June 1985. Lukhanyo, you're also a colleague of ours, and thank you very much for joining us, because this is a very difficult day for your family. The 20th of July 1985 is the day that the Cradock Four was buried. It was one of the biggest political funerals of its time. You were just 3 years old. I presume you don't have any memories, but it must be still a very difficult day.
Sally, thank you very much. Well, the day of my father's funeral is actually the first and the only memory that I have of him. So this day means so much to me because it connects me to my dad. It's really the one memory that I have. I remember, as you correctly point out, being, I was a 3-year-old little boy at the time, and I remember being very afraid at some point, just at the number of people that were in Cradock, number of people that were at the funeral, not understanding what was going on, and my mother crying just, for most of the time. And I remember being very, very afraid when we were at the gravesite and people were singing and toy-toying and chanting, and the ground underneath my feet, it felt like it was going to cave in. So whenever I think about that day, it takes me back to being a 3-year-old little boy that's very afraid. But I realize, obviously, that I'm almost 40 years old now, so I don't have to be afraid. But this day is it's very special it connects me to my dad.
And I think it's special for another reason, because of the court action that you're launching today. I just want a little bit of background, because the TRC recommended prosecution for apartheid killers who didn't get amnesty, didn't apply for amnesty, or didn't fully disclose their crimes. I want to know, because I know that the Cradock Four cases were passed on for possible prosecution, what has led you to believe that this is not simply a matter of this case falling through the cracks because the new government had so much else to do, but rather a deliberate plan never to proceed with prosecution?
Well, Sally, in 1994, which about 18 days after former President Nelson Mandela was elected into office, there was a second inquest led by Judge Neville Zitzman, and he had said at the time that there were members of the apartheid security forces that could be linked directly to the murders of my father and his colleagues. So we were always under the impression that we were going to see justice. In 95, when Mandela came to Cradock, and he said that the Cradock Four were the true heroes of the struggle. In 96, when my mother and them, were among the first to testify at the TRC hearings, we genuinely thought that there would be justice. But I think from 2003 onwards, we started realizing that the government of the time under Thabo Mbeki was really not interested in prosecuting these matters. And then there was a case where former President Mbeki wanted to actually grant a backdoor amnesty to some of the apartheid killers and those that had never applied for amnesty. So from then on, we were convinced that there was something a lot darker, something that was very sinister here, and it meant that those who had committed the crimes against our humanity would actually never be charged for the crimes that they had committed.
And it's interesting reading through the papers papers that you submitted today to the court, Advocate Vusi Pikoli, the former NDPP, has supplied supporting affidavit, and he says very clearly that there was political interference on the part of the democratic government to stop these prosecutions. And the obvious question is, why would the leaders of a democratic country who fought apartheid want to stop these prosecutions? What do you think's going on?
Sally, that's a question that we're going to have to ask the former leaders of this government, of the African National Congress as well, because they owe us those answers. They need to tell us why it is that we are still sitting here 36 years later, 27 years into a democratic South Africa, where we are still fighting for justice, for a murder that was, or for murders at least, that was so heinous, that was so brutal. And I mean, like, everybody knows the murders, knows about the murders of the Cradock Four. So I think that question needs to be answered by the administrations of Thabo Mbeki, the administrations of Kgalema Motlanthe, and by the administration of Jacob Zuma, and to a large extent now the administration of Cyril Ramaphosa. All of them, they need to come forward and they need to tell us why exactly were these cases and all of these murders never prosecuted. You know, Sally, there was a very interesting point that F.W. de Klerk made in a statement that he issued earlier this month, where he said that there were former leaders of the ANC that got into some informal agreement with the former apartheid operatives to not prosecute these TRC cases. So we need to know from the F.W. de Klerk Foundation who those former leaders of the ANC were, and we need to hold the ANC accountable for entering into deals without our mandate.
And of course, this doesn't just relate to the Cradock Four. This relates to quite a number of cases that the TRC handed over to the prosecuting authorities and said, look, these are 300 cases, they didn't qualify for amnesty or they didn't apply for amnesty. You can go ahead and look and see if there's a case to prosecute. And I think none of them have come through. But what we've seen recently is some court cases, I think Ran Nokutuli Simelane and others, where it's becoming more and more clear that there was a deliberate decision not to prosecute. And also, and this is very disturbing, the disappearance really recently of a docket. Tell us about that.
Well, we were told about the disappearance of the docket, I think in 2019, Sally, when we obviously started to work with our lawyers, the Cliff Decker-Hofmeyer, as well as the Foundation for Human Rights, when we requested the docket to see, you know, what it said. And then all of a sudden, then the NPA had to come clean and tell us that, well, in fact, they don't know what happened to the docket. And it's, you know, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad. Because who's been held accountable inside the NPA for the disappearance of a criminal docket into a matter that is as serious as the murders of the Cradock Four? So, you know, this affidavit by Advocate Vusi Pikoli, it's really just shone the light and confirmed to us that there's no political will. There's never been any political will inside the African National Congress, as well as the government that it leads, to prosecute these hundreds of cases. People who had bled, people who gave up their lives for the constitutional democracy that we enjoy today. And I hope that, you know, myself and along with the other families and all of the people that are supporting us, that we will get those answers from the African National Congress when the time comes for them to answer for this ultimate betrayal of our fathers and our mothers.
Well, we will watch this court case with great interest. Papers lodged today. And thank you so much for speaking to us on what clearly is a very difficult day. And we know that you've made it your life struggle to get justice for your father and the rest of the Cradock Four. So our thoughts are with you today, particularly. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That, of course, was Lukhanyo Calata, the son of Fort Calata. He's one of the Cradock Four. And the four of them were murdered under apartheid orders 36 years ago today. They were buried. Still no justice.